Latinos have grown at the second fastest rate of any major racial and ethnic group in the United States electorate since the last presidential election. An estimated 36.2 million Latinos are eligible to vote this year, up from 32.3 million in 2020. This represents 50% of the total growth in eligible voters during this time. But what will it take for this group of voters to exercise their rights to help decide the 2024 presidential election? Joining us now to talk about some of the key issues and motivations for Latino voters is Luis Jimenez. He's Associate Professor of Political Science and Director of the International Relations undergraduate major at UMass Boston. Welcome. So, Mr. Jimenez, will that jump in eligible voters mean an increase in voters at the polls? You know, there's a perception that many Latinos are more interested in the politics of their country of origin than here in the United States.
Latino voters have been growing since about 2006. Every single election has seen more growth for Latinos. So I am sure that they will grow in 2024. However, whether that will actually reach their potential, I think, is very doubtful. There's lots of reasons for that, but that process or the reasons behind that, I don't think have changed much. So I don't think that they will reach their potential, but it will definitely grow.
So taking a look at the 2020 voter turnout, only 54% of eligible Latino voters cast a ballot. That's the lowest by any racial group.
Correct. The reasons for this are basically socialization is part of it. These groups, or many of the people that are eligible, are the children of immigrants, and so they have not voted before. Their families haven't, so that's part of it. The other part of it is that historically the parties haven't reached out to them that much. This is changing, but it takes a while for that to happen. And the third thing is that in general, again, because of the history, they seem to be less interested in participating. And one other thing, also, they tend to be less educated and also have less wealth, which are markers of more participation. So for all of these reasons, which haven't changed that much since 2020, I think that the overall number will definitely grow, but I don't think they will reach the potential that they have.
We have some more data to share. After the presidential election in 2020, Latino citizens reported less contact with campaigns than adult U.S. citizens overall, particularly against eligible voters, 87% of whom said they were contacted versus 75% of Latino voters who said that they were.
Yeah, the reasons for that are because, in general, many of the Latino households tend to be mixed eligibility. That is, you have parents who might not be eligible to vote, or even children. And so because of that, it's more expensive to reach out to them. That is, even if you could get, if you're able to change their minds, you're going to get fewer votes than if you would do with a comparable household. So for that reason, because it's more expensive, and also it has sometimes is in Spanish, or you have to do Spanish and English. Because of that expense, parties tend to reach out to them at a fewer pace than other comparable groups.
Which, of course, is too bad. Now, do you have any indication that the Trump and Harris campaigns have been paying more attention to Latino voters, should be engaging with them during this election cycle?
The Trump campaign actually in 2020 started to do this more, and I haven't seen specific numbers for reach out. Harris has had a much shorter period of time to do this. And so I think they're behind the ball on that to some extent. But the Biden campaign had been trying to reach out to voters. I think in both cases, Republicans and Democrats know the potential. It's just that, again, because it's so expensive, they still tend to do it less than they could. Just because they know that the payoff will be less.
So the issue of the border and immigration has been addressed by both candidates, each one blaming the other for lack of progress on this issue. The perception is that this would be one of the most important issues to many Latino voters. But is it?
That's a really interesting question. The issue with Latino voters as a whole, or part of the problem, is that we think of them as being a single group, but in fact, there's many of them, right? There's people that recently just got here. There's people that have been here for generations. So for some folks, immigration is a huge issue, and for others, it's not. The border as a whole, like in general, if you look at the entire Latino population, the border is not the number one issue, or immigration. The number one issue tends to be economics and housing, the cost of housing. So those are the main issues. But if you look at particular groups, like by nationality or by age, immigration becomes more an issue. The main one, actually, the main sort of predictor is whether people think of themselves as Latinos or not. There are people that we would think of them as Latinos, but they themselves might not. So that's part of an issue. It's a complicated group, which is why it's so hard to sort of predict their behavior.
Well, as you've said, the Latino vote is not a monolith, but we are going to ask you to predict some behavior. What do you think is going to drive Latino voters to the polls?
Well, I do think that it's very interesting what's happening. They have in the last few elections started to move a little bit more to the Republican side. There seems to be a change in education with them. That is, the overall electorate has been shifting towards educational polarization. That is, if you are a college graduate, you tend to vote for Democrats. If you're a only high school graduate, you tend to vote for Republicans. That has been happening with the overall electorate. This seems to now be moving towards Latinos as well, and they seem to be behaving more like the general electorate. I think that will continue, but the really key question is those groups that have just a relatively recent new voters, and that's hard to predict. We don't have enough data on that, but I do think that the Harris campaign will get the majority of the vote, no question. It's just a matter of, the key question is whether Trump will get 1 or 2 more points than he did in 2020. At this point, the polls say that he is, but I'm a bit skeptical about that.
Okay, now you're working with students, many of them undergraduates, Gen Z Latino voters. What are you hearing from them?
They're a very interesting group. It used to be that they would be more monolithically Democratic, especially in Boston, which is a very blue city. It's not that they are more Trump-like or that they support Trump, but they're skeptical. They were very skeptical of Biden. They didn't like him very much at all. They are more skeptical of Harris for a host of reasons than they would have been under traditional Democratic presidential candidates like Obama. But it's unclear whether that will change much of their actual behavior. That is, I still think they'll probably vote for Harris, but they'll do so.
They'll do so reluctantly. Yes. All right. Luis
Exactly.
Jimenez, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights. Up